100% we were cheating because that's the fun of the horror genre. We would not give you the scare where you expect it. If you hold a scare for too long, then the impact will go. If you hold it for too less, then the audience will be like, did I just see that?
I want to begin by asking you, what are the challenges of directing a horror film? I mean, you have a script, but what are the extra things that you have to take care of that you don't have to in, say, a rom-com?
I think the challenges are mainly that visualizing what is going to be the end product, because in a rom-com, you fairly have an idea when the characters, you know, the lines happen and the actors do their thing. You know it's working right then and there, you know, the chemistry is working and the humor is working or the meet cute is working or whatever it is. But in horror, you really don't know till you finish the VFX and the sound design and all that, whether the scare is working, you know. So that's the biggest challenge in a horror film. You have to just visualize. Of course, you're thinking steps ahead and seeing how it's all going to come together. But that's the difficult part of the process, I would say.
So you're saying the script is no indicator that the film is going to end up as scary as you want it to be?
Yeah. It's absolutely not, because it's on paper, you know the scares are there and you fairly have an idea that the pacing, and we did it by the numbers, you know, like, okay, at every certain given point there should be this kind of a impact and a scare and all that. So you can calculate all that, but then you really don't know, even while shooting it, you know, you have a vibe, okay, yeah, this kind of is falling into place, but you still don't know, even after you've shot it. It's only when the whole post-production is done and you play it to an audience, which like a test screening which we did, that, and you see them jump out of their seat, that's when you realize it's working.
It's working.
So it's working, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the difficult part of it, you know. So it's all, like, you know in your head when you've written it, like how you want it to be, but then till that happens, you actually have no idea of how effective it's going to be. That's the thing.
Okay. As a director, do you micromanage every aspect of the production? Or do you kind of say, okay, now this part will be handled by the sound guys, I'm just going to look at the end result and see if it's working for me or not?
I think it's a bit of both, because I'm a little bit of a control freak in that sense. So I kind of do let everybody do their own things, but we have a discussion. We had this spotting session with the sound designers where we sat and ran through the whole film, the cut of the film, and we spotted areas where we want to do, you know, risers and, you know, things like that, and where we want to have silence and things like that. So so we had that together, and then I just let them do their thing. And then and they didn't want me to come also, because especially in a film like this, when you're adding so much of detail and sound, they lose perspective after some time. So they're like, no, don't come, because we want someone with a fresh perspective when we come in. So then I come back in, and then we sit together again, and that's when the micromanaging happens, where sometimes it might be too many things happening, so it's just, we just take off a lot of the design and elements and music elements, or if there's not enough happening, then I tell them that we need to put in more and things like that. So it's a bit of both actually, you know, because you have to give them the space to basically come up with ideas and things like that. So you start with a brief, then they do it, then you micromanage it, and you iron out the details, and that's the way we worked on this project.
Can you tell us specific things that you did in these 5 areas that I'm going to ask you about to help us understand the craft better in terms of a horror film, right? I'm interested in the color palette, the sound design, the background score, the cinematography, and the editing.
Okay. Now, starting with the color palette. Now, we wanted this film to be very unique, and we've set it in the mountains and things like that. And what you'd expect is, you know, cold blue tones, and that's what. But we went completely away from that, and we used a green color palette and had increased the warm tones and things like that. And that was completely done in the post-production, in the DI process with the cinematographer and the colorist and things like that. So Siddharth and me were very clear that we wanted to set it apart from what you'd expect as a visual palette in terms of where it was being set and things like that.
Is it just to break the cliche of a mountain place? Or
yes, it was to break the cliche, and it also sets a unique tone for the film, you know. So that kind of, that's what people are saying, that it's a Hollywood style film and things like that. That's what they do. They do so much of work in post, and they give a unique tone to the thing which sets it apart from other films in the same genre, and that's what we wanted to do basically. And so that was a lot of work went into that, and they literally sat like around 7 months and gave us different tones and things that we went back and forth on until we finally fixed on one color palette that we wanted to use. And we fairly had an idea when we went into pre-production itself. That's why if you see the production design, costumes, costume designs, everything was fitting into that palette. That's why the consistency can be there.
Right.
So so we had a lot of greens and blacks and things like that, and just one element of reds would pop in the frame. So we'd want the blood to stand out. So otherwise there'll be not much of red and all that. And then there are a lot of scenes have just the fireplace light and things like that. So we boosted the warms in that. So that gave a very interesting balance between the green and the warmth when we boosted it and all that in post. So it kind of was gave a very unique look to the overall film.
So when you're talking about the color palette, you're talking about the look of the film as an entity in itself, or are you also looking at it as a horror film and therefore this color palette works?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
So you're looking at it as something that kind of will also unsettle you. So that kind of gives you a slightly eerie feel, and that's kind of also is the design of the color palette, what it's meant to do. So that's what we did with the color palette. Now coming to the next thing, the sound design. Now that's a huge part of the film, and those guys have worked on it for nearly 7 to 8 months and all that, and we'd have a lot of very interesting discussions and like for example, starting with the wind, set it in the Himalayas and things like that. So the wind was a huge character in the film. So the wind is not cold enough. So we'll add other layers, layers of wind that will kind of make you feel the isolation and the coldness of the place, especially the cliff sequence.
Okay.
The cliff sequence, we had howling winds and things like that. So kind of when she's standing on the edge of the cliff and the winds are there, that itself kind of gives you a kind of like a scary feel, it makes you sit on the edge of your seat. So those kind of things, what we did, that is one of the things we did. And then every single element of the sound design was intended to create a very specific feeling inside, in the audience's mind. Like in the bathroom sequence when she sits, there's this heartbeat that was trying to make you feel what she is feeling as she is hearing. And the door, the banging of the door was enhanced, hugely in post. So it kind of increased the bass, the EQs of the bass and all that, so that you feel it in your chest as an audience, so you really feel that the door is banging, it's going to break open and something is going to come and rush in at you. So those kind of things are all done to enhance make the audience feel what the characters are feeling and thereby feel the fear. And this is just 2 examples, but I'm saying that every single area of the film has been designed so specifically by the sound design team, the fantastic team, Vijay Ratnam, Vishnu Shankar and Rahmatullah, these guys. And they would have a very interesting back and forth with the music director as well, because at one point you wouldn't know what is design and what is music. That's the kind of blending that they would do. So the music director would work with a 2-track from the sound design, what they've done, and compose around that. Okay. And then he'd compose something and then send a 2-track of that to the sound designers, and they'd work around it. And sometimes they'd say that no, this is better with just music and this is better with just sound design. So let's pull the music element out of it and let's keep the sound design. So those calls were being taken and they worked very, very closely together.
So just to add to so you were cheating a bit in the sense that the sound design wasn't naturalistic. You were kind of going for a little bit of
yes,
yeah.
100% we were cheating, because that's the fun of the horror genre.
Right.
You're trying to create a mood,
right.
a feeling, and fear. So like for example, James Wan himself has said in his interviews that more than the visual, sound is the bigger and most important thing in a horror film, and
right.
and it's exactly. Everything was just enhanced and built to give you that fear. Coming to the
background score, you just talked about it a bit, yeah.
Background score was unbelievably done by Girish in this film, and he's kind of, like I said, worked very closely with the sound design and very evocative music that he's given in terms of getting this Macedonian symphony orchestra and getting very, very normally in a horror film, you don't expect plush strings and orchestra and this whole choir and all that comes. But that bigness is what makes the interval block and all that, the bigness of the strings and all that gives you that it was an homage to Omen, you know,
Yeah.
that Omen has that whole huge, that orchestra kind of choir kind of thing.
Yeah,
So that was an immediate go-to for us where we could, that just made that whole block bigger, and that's a theme that keeps repeating in the climax as well. So those are the things that he did that were really fantastic, you know, which you wouldn't expect in a horror film. You'd find more jangled violence kind of this thing and a lot of things. But then he actually got in a lot of musical elements, which was kind of keeping you, like in the Dr. Prasad scene, that piece he had composed before we went into shoot. As we shot that scene, that's the first piece of background score that we shot it on set, and that night we had Kishore, the editor, was with us through the shoot, so he would do online editing right off the footage that we got. And we just placed that piece on that, and it just sat so beautifully. We didn't change anything. We never changed that. That piece just sat so beautifully there. And as he goes through the room and looks at Jenny's room and looks at various things and makes notes, as you see on screen, this piece of music just kind of holds that scene together so well. So that's not typically a horror score, but it's just a beautiful piece of music that makes you, takes you into that world. Coming to the cinematography, we worked, Shreyas Krishna is the fantastic DOP, and we worked very closely together from pre-production as to how we would block the scenes and how we would shoot it. And production design also was based on, he had a discussion with the production designer and the costume designer, and that nobody should go out of the color palette, and this is the tone. And if you look inside the house is completely wallpapered. Now this is something they do all the time in the West. If you see the wallpaper would just give you, we selected designs which would make the corridors look more claustrophobic and narrow. Those are the kind of details that he went into as a cinematographer, not just shooting the thing, but in terms of the pre-production of every aesthetic that went into the film was planned, you know, everything that you're seeing. And then coming from there to the cinematography, like we decided we wouldn't, like normally if you see found footage horror films, they would shoot very, a lot of zooms would be there where you'd, you know, just kind of very like handheld-ish kind of thing. We wanted to shoot it very classic, very block lenses, you know, and things like that, and very, stage it like an old school, like a proper classic horror film kind of thing. Even the frames and the compositions that we discussed, a lot of negative space when we wanted characters to feel isolated and alone and stuff. We'd frame them with a lot of negative space and things like that. And editing now is such a huge part of horror films, because it's about if you hold a scare for too long, then the impact will go. If you hold it for too less, then the audience will be like, did I just see that? You know, the fear. We did an actual breakdown looking at a lot of films and where the scares have worked big time, and seeing how long they held the shot, you know, like was it 1 second, was it like just 24, like just one, like 12 frames, you know, how long did they hold that shot for you to get that jump scare to happen? And very scientifically saw exactly the length, and then we, you know, did that in our edit, because we didn't want to do something and then see if it worked. You know, a lot of the transitions, edit transitions that you see, a lot of it was very specifically designed. I mean, it was also written in, when Siddharth and me were writing it, you know, going into Jenny's eye and then going into her mind space, all that was written into the script, you know. But a lot of transitions when we wanted to do the psychic's vision, and we had just said he touches something and you see the psychic's vision, but that exact thing that you go into his mind space, all those transitions were, we tried out a lot of different transitions, and before we settled on something that would take you into his vision and things like that. So these are all the things we did on the edit, and pacing and all that, you know, how long should we hold a shot before people start booing. It was fascinating to see. I went to the most mainstream of theaters where the mass crowd comes and all that. And we had sections of shots were just 5 seconds long, like the house, the corridor shot, you know, when Atul Kulkarni is writing something and he hears his daughter singing the lullaby, Chinese lullaby. And we just held that corridor shot for 5 seconds of silence. And the audience is just watching. And we were amazed to see that they are actually accepting all these things that we did. And that usually we'd be very scared that they'll start booing and they'll start this thing. But the way the film was set up and the world it was taking them into they completely surrendered to it, and then it was fascinating to see that the kind of silences we were able to hold. But it's very scary when you're on the edit table, because you don't know if this is going to work. But it for us on an instinctive level, it was working. Okay, this is setting up the mood. So we went with it, and it's kind of like paid off, and it's worked, and it's just taking them into that world and things like that.
So can you pick a scene, whichever scene you want, and kind of take us through how all these elements kind of fell into place?
Yeah, and I think I'll pick a scene which is everybody's favorite, which is the exorcism scene. Jenny's exorcism scene.
Which is just the scene before the interval.
It involves all the crafts in the film, and it was such a huge set piece that it involved the stunt team, it involved the multiple camera setups, it involved all the actors, it involved prosthetic makeup, and it involved a huge amount of sound design and music. And so basically all the departments had to come in there, and the production design, when things were going out of control, and all things were going hell breaks loose and all that. So production design, each element was very important and all that. So the earlier scene before that, when Dr. Prasad looks at the room, had two reasons. One was to set up this scene. So you see the whole room and the geography, and then now you come in there for the exorcism, you know where everything is taking place. So that the thing is that we storyboarded that scene. And we broke it down. The exorcism scene, we storyboarded that scene and broke it down into specific shots and compositions of what we exactly wanted to do, because we knew that was going to be a challenging scene. We shot it over 4 days. The actors were all wired with the stunt things, because they were being thrown across here and there, and they were all very, very cooperative, that they did it themselves. They didn't have a stunt double and things like that. When Atul Kulkarni goes flying, and when the pastor turns upside down, and the girl goes flying, and then and things like that. And when Siddharth goes flying, and the cupboard falls on top of him, all this they were all wired with stunt ropes and things like that. And so it was a big toll on them, and just the performance, also working with the actors, working with Jenny, and getting that kind of a performance from her. And she's a first-time actor. Getting something like that out of her and she delivered big time. And then cinematography, if you see the whole toning of the film, once the exorcism starts, the red bleeds in, and it becomes like this lurid red kind of thing. And then if you really notice the details, once the exorcism is over, the red drains out of the thing just before the interval and things like that. So these are all elements that just kind of push subconsciously the audience that it's into a dangerous zone, and things are changing, and that kind of thing. That's what Shreyas and Suresh, the colorist, they both just started pushing the reds once the exorcism actually started happening. So this was on a cinematography level, and if you see the way we frame it, you look at the cross turning upside down from the pastor's point of view, the composition of that shot, all those were storyboarded.
So logistically and psychologically, that is, you're going for like these things, right?
Yeah, they were going for these things, and because it's very easy for these things, for it to become corny, really cheesy, and so we were very careful about that. And if you see, VFX is another department that came into this big time, because if you see the way her body contorts, when she first, and you hear the bone breaking and all that, that was actually done in post, and a lot of her scratching herself and the nerves on her neck and all that were done in post and VFX, and enhanced that thing. So it kind of really makes you look away when, at least I saw people doing that, and we're crossing the line from, is it all in her head, or is it actually happening to her? So we had to cross that line definitively. So the CG helped in enhancing that feel as well. And then the prosthetic makeup. As you see the exorcism, from when it starts and you first reveal her face to the end, when she finally goes up and the cross is burned in on her forehead and all that. So a lot of it had stages. We'd say stage 1, where it's just this kind of rash kind of thing on her face. Stage 2, where it would increase, we'd increase the thing, and then stage 3, where we had blood in her mouth. And stage 4 was the final one with the cross on her head and things like that. And even that cross on her head was enhanced with VFX, like that when the pastor touched her forehead, like it was burning and stuff like that. And how you felt it was burning? Because of the sound. So that's where sound came in. When she screams, you had to have a very good balance, that the scream doesn't become intolerable for the audience, because like they close their ears. At the same time, they had to feel the scream, and things rattling and everything, and the score had to creep in there.
Right.
So it was a very difficult thing to mix that scene also. You know, the final sound mix of that scene was a very, very challenging process. You know, that's why we had 3 sound designers on the film, and then a sound mixer as well, because it was too much to take. You know, when you're hearing those sounds and you're layering it, and there was a lot of voice treatment that was done to Jenny's voice. She's done a fantastic dub, but we took that and enhanced those screams, and you know, made it more guttural, made it more inhuman and things like that. So, and Girish's score, that's where the end of the scene gives you that whole symphonic, that orchestra set piece, that choir thing, which gives you a really foreboding finish and saying that this is not over yet kind of thing. So that's why, and just makes it huge kind of thing. So leaves you with that, oh God, what's going to happen next? So that was where Girish kicked in and gave that hugeness to that thing, to the finish of that scene. So all the elements came together nicely and to give you that impact.
What really is interesting about that scene is that it works at a scare level and at a dramatic level, because the audience is feeling the fear, but they also feel the pain this girl is going through.
Yeah.
You know, that it works on 2 levels. So you're not sacrificing the drama just for the sake of like giving like shocks or jolts or whatever it is. So that's something else you
Exactly. We wanted everybody to not just, you know, recoil in this thing, but that's what happens in films like The Exorcist. You're shocked, but then you feel for that girl. You know, that's what we were going for, and that's like an homage to that film. People are saying that oh, it is The Exorcist. No, it's not.
That's why she's reading the book.
Yeah, it's an homage. It's like, it's one of the most. So if you're doing an exorcism, you know, there is something that set a benchmark, and I would say the way we have shot it, composed it, lit it, and executed it is completely different from that. But so it doesn't mean that just because it's an exorcism, it's a rip-off from The Exorcist, you know. But we have heard a lot of people saying that, but it's a different take. It's like saying if you have a love story, then you can't ever do another love story again. No, it's not that. If you have an exorcism in your film, it's just how you treat it and how you handle it.
Horror is a bit of a contained genre, right? In the sense of it's been done, and there's a fairly fixed way in which you go about it. I mean, the story may be different, the ghost may be different or whatever, but there's a certain beats that you have to hit, right? So what did you do to make audiences not predict that this is where the scare is going to come, or I can see this is where it's going to come? Because the thing is, some people shut their eyes in anticipation, right? And they're able to get through the horror film because they know when exactly to shut their eyes. Did you keep that in mind while you were writing the...
Yes. We kept that in mind, and we further improvised that on set, because while we were writing the scares, we were very clear that, Siddharth and me, we were very clear that we would not give you the scare where you expect it. And then once we went on set, we realized that it was still giving you the scare where you expected it, and we changed things around further on set. That's one more thing we did. All the scares have a meaning to the story of the film, you know, not just scare for the sake of being a scare. Right. So as we wrote that scene, it was fairly simple that she'd go up and look in the tank, come back down, hear something, go back up and see that there's something in the tank which pops up, and then you should get the audience will get the big scare. So that's how it was written. And once we went on set, you know, we were like shooting that scene, and then go up and she comes down. We were choreographing that whole thing and doing the build-ups and everything, and realized that once she heard something and went back up, it was fairly obvious that the audience is right now completely queued up to seeing something there. They're wired there. They're wired there because she's gone up. They thought something's going to happen. As soon as she opens, nothing happened. Okay, now we know it's not going to. So some people are telling me this is what they went through. They thought it's going to come when she goes down. So she went down, nothing happened. And then she came back up again. So this time they're going to definitely get us, is what they thought. But what we improvised on the set is, because we knew they were expecting it there, we said no. So she opens it, it's not there. And then when she has the hatch open, and we had it in broad daylight, when she closes the hatch, it's standing right next to her head. And it just everybody just screamed in the theater when they saw that, because you didn't give them what they expected. So it was something we improvised on set more than what we had written. And it's fairly simple to say, yeah, it's not such a big thing, but it is to get that scream from the audience, that payoff. It's those small things which matter.
What are some of the films that you used, either like an homage, like you said, Exorcist and Omen, or as a style reference, saying that you just talked about the editing and the timing and all that? So what are some of the films that you used?
Well, We're huge fans of Korean and Japanese horror, and films like The Ring, and the original, the Japanese Ring, Ringu it's called, and films like The Tale of Two Sisters, and films like these. We wanted to actually be very original, so we never really used any of the techniques they did, but just as an imagery, in terms of having an oriental presence in the film, which lent itself to a lot of other elements like a Chinese lullaby, and scratch marks in Chinese, and a whole Chinese flashback and all those things, which just gave you a completely new visual element to play with, and it's also culturally very close to our society in terms of the bigger evil that we had rooted the film in, so culturally they have the same bigger evil that exists in their society too as well. So it's not just for the sake of just that oriental element, but we wanted to give a new face for horror, because if you look at all the horror films, the great horror films, they would have defined a visual that you'll never forget, and that's what we were going for with all the homages that we have to all the Korean and Japanese films, that we want to bring those elements in as a visual element that would give us a lot of things to play with also, so those are the things that you could say were influences, but like I said, we've seen Korean and Japanese horror films, but what we had in our film was Chinese, so you can say it's different that way. We would study how they have done the exorcism in The Exorcist, and we would but not and so we would say how we can do that differently, but using all the tricks they did, so that kind of stuff is what we did. How much silence did they use, how much of score came in, and that was a completely different treatment where it was just dead silent and very real. Here we wanted to make it more hell breaks loose, so you have a lot of elements going around, a lot of things breaking, and a lot of really so I'm saying that's how we differentiated these things. But on the back of our mind, we had all these things. The whole bigness of the symphony orchestra came in from you can say an homage to the Omen kind of thing that they did, and but we did it in the way we wanted to do it for our story and things like that. So these are some of the, you can say, elements that we were truly inspired from in trying to create a new face for horror for our audiences, because you've never seen an international audience, horror film festivals and all, saying, that Korean film was fantastic, the Japanese, but nobody talks about Indian horror, about we've never made really something that can go to these things and actually stand out and get people to say that film from India, that horror film from India is just fantastic kind of thing. So I think now we have that with what we've done. I think it's easy. I think at least from the feedback we've been getting and all that, I think we safely to say that this film to put us on the horror map, I guess.
On that note, congratulations.
Thank you so much. If you like what you saw, do subscribe to Film Companion South.